The bodybuilding scene of the 1990s was defined by massive physiques, legendary rivalries, and athletes who pushed the limits of the human body further than ever before. Among all those names, few stood out quite like Nasser El Sonbaty. With an imposing physique and unforgettable stage presence, he quickly established himself as one of the most impressive competitors of his generation. His sheer size, symmetry, and commanding presence made it impossible for the audience to look anywhere else when he stepped on stage. You simply couldn't ignore him. But Nasser wasn't just another powerful bodybuilder, there was something different about him. Beyond his extraordinary physique, Nasser also stood out for something rare in the bodybuilding world: his intelligence. Known by many as the Professor, he wasn't just a disciplined competitor, he was highly educated and incredibly articulate. Fluent in multiple languages and backed by a strong academic background, he had a unique ability to express ideas clearly and confidently. This combination of brain and muscle helped shape a one-of-a-kind image in the sport. He wasn't just an elite athlete, he was a strong, memorable personality. Throughout his career, many experts believed Nasser had everything it took to win the biggest title in bodybuilding, the Mr. Olympia. His physique checked all the boxes judges traditionally look for: size, conditioning, and balanced aesthetics. With each competition, it felt like he was getting closer and closer to the top. For many fans, it seemed like only a matter of time before he would finally hold the most prestigious trophy in professional bodybuilding. Throughout this video, we're going to dive deep into the journey of Nasser El Sonbaty, from his meteoric rise in the sport to the events that completely changed the way he viewed bodybuilding. So make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and now, let's get into it. Nasser El Sonbaty was born on October 15, 1965, in Stuttgart, Germany. From an early age, he already had an impressive physical presence, but at that time, no one could have imagined that this young man would one day become one of the most iconic bodybuilders of the 1990s. Interestingly, bodybuilding wasn't even part of his original life plan. Unlike many athletes who grow up dreaming of competing on stage, Nasser had very different interests during his youth. As a teenager, his main focus was soccer. Like many young Europeans, he saw the sport as a way to compete, have fun, and develop his physical abilities. It was actually through soccer that he first started going to the gym. The goal was simple: strengthen his legs and improve his performance on the field. Back then, lifting weights was just a complement to his athletic training, not a passion. What's even more interesting is that Nasser didn't have a positive view of bodybuilding at that time. When he saw photos of bodybuilders in magazines, he thought the physiques looked overly muscular, even strange. The extreme size, vascularity, and overall look of the sport didn't impress him at all. To the young Nasser, that world felt distant and unappealing. But fate had other plans. Everything began to change when a Hungarian weightlifter who trained at the same gym noticed something special in him. Looking at his structure, the experienced lifter quickly recognized his massive potential for muscle development. He started encouraging Nasser to train more seriously, not just focusing on legs, but developing his entire physique. Slowly but surely, his training became more structured and intense. After about 2 years of consistent training, other people at the gym began noticing the dramatic transformation in his physique. They encouraged him to enter a local bodybuilding competition in Germany. Even as a beginner competing in the junior division, he managed to place 6th. It might not sound like a huge victory, but that moment changed something inside him. For the first time, Nasser realized he might have found his true path in the sport. While many athletes focused almost entirely on training, Nasser took a slightly different route. Alongside building his impressive physique, he also dedicated himself deeply to his education. For him, the body and the mind should evolve together. This mindset already started to set him apart from many other competitors in the sport. During his university years, he developed a strong interest in fields related to critical thinking and understanding society. Nasser went on to earn a master's degree in political science, history, and sociology. These areas of study broadened his worldview and sharpened his ability to communicate and debate ideas. In a sport where most interviews were short and straightforward, he stood out for how articulate and thoughtful he was. On top of that, Nasser was also known for his ability with languages. He was fluent in several, which allowed him to connect with fans, journalists, and athletes from all over the world. This helped him build a strong international presence and reinforced his image as a unique figure in bodybuilding. He wasn't just an elite competitor, he was a man with a powerful intellectual presence. This rare combination of a powerful physique and a sharp mind quickly caught the attention of the bodybuilding community. Behind the scenes at competitions, many athletes began referring to him jokingly as the Professor. The nickname stuck and soon became a defining part of his identity in the sport. Nasser represented something unusual, a bodybuilder who could dominate the stage just as easily as he could hold a deep conversation about politics, history, or society. That duality helped shape the image fans came to admire. Nasser wasn't just another massive athlete chasing trophies, he embodied a more complex, refined version of what bodybuilding could be. After discovering his passion for bodybuilding and spending years refining his physique, Nasser began taking serious steps toward the professional stage. His body stood out for its rare combination of size, symmetry, and stage presence. Slowly but surely, he went from being a promising European athlete to someone catching the attention of major names in the bodybuilding industry. His progress was undeniable, and it felt like only a matter of time before he reached the sport's biggest stages. The turning point came in 1990, when Nasser earned his IFBB Pro card. This was far more than just a symbolic achievement. Turning pro meant officially entering the elite level of global bodybuilding, competing against some of the best athletes in the world. Once he joined the professional circuit, he quickly made his mark in Grand Prix competitions. Even while facing experienced and well-established pros, Nasser displayed remarkable consistency in his performances. His balanced physique and confident stage presence stood out to fans, judges, and promoters alike. With each show, the feeling grew stronger, a new major contender was rising in the sport. That rise led to an invitation to compete at the biggest event in bodybuilding, the Mr. Olympia. In 1994, Nasser stepped onto the Olympia stage for the first time. While many didn't expect him to make a major impact in his debut, he surprised everyone by finishing in 7th place. Even more impressive was the fact that he placed ahead of several well-known and respected competitors. That performance caught the attention of one of the most influential figures in bodybuilding history, Joe Weider. Recognizing Nasser's enormous potential, Weider offered him a professional contract. This support not only provided financial stability but also opened major doors within the industry. With Joe Weider's backing and now fully committed to the sport, Nasser entered a new phase of his career. For the first time, he could dedicate all his energy to training, competing, and refining every detail of his physique. Without the need to split his focus with other professional responsibilities, his results began to show even more strongly on stage. With each competition, his name carried more weight in the pro ranks. That progress became crystal clear at the 1995 Mr. Olympia. That year, Nasser brought an extremely competitive package, combining massive muscle size with balanced aesthetics that stood out to the judges. The result was a major milestone. He placed 3rd at the most prestigious competition in bodybuilding. For many fans and experts, this was a clear sign that Nasser was closing in on the very top of the sport. The following year, in 1996, he returned to the Olympia stage even more dialed in. Once again, his physique impressed both the crowd and the judges, and Nasser secured another 3rd-place finish. It seemed like his trajectory was steadily rising. Each appearance revealed a more refined, more confident athlete and one getting closer and closer to challenging for the ultimate title in bodybuilding. However, that same year also brought a difficult moment in his career. After the competition, Nasser was disqualified due to a positive test for diuretics. The decision sparked controversy and cast a shadow over what initially seemed like another major step forward in his rise. Even so, the incident wasn't enough to erase the impact his physique was making on the sport. Despite the controversy, Nasser continued to be seen as one of the most dangerous competitors in the division. His size, symmetry, and stage presence meant that any athlete stepping on stage with him had to take him very seriously. But his biggest moment was still yet to come. The year 1997 marked the most defining moment of Nasser's career. After years of steady progress and establishing himself among the world's elite, many believed his time had finally come. That year's Mr. Olympia wasn't just another contest for Nasser, it felt like the perfect stage to turn all his hard work and dedication into the most coveted title in bodybuilding. At the time, the reigning champion was Dorian Yates, a dominant force who had built an incredible streak of victories. But heading into the 1997 Olympia, his preparation was far from ideal. Yates arrived at the show dealing with multiple injuries accumulated from years of brutally intense training. Those physical issues raised serious questions about whether he was truly in condition to defend his title once again. Meanwhile, Nasser was entering the competition at one of the strongest points of his career. During his Olympia prep, he dialed in every detail of his physique. And when he finally stepped on stage, he presented one of the best conditioning packages of his entire career. His physique combined massive size, sharp conditioning, and a level of symmetry that very few athletes could achieve at that level. The showdown between Nasser and Yates created a wave of anticipation among fans and experts. Many believed this could be the moment a new champion would rise. Nasser looked to be in peak form, ready to challenge the reigning king head-to-head. As the poses and comparisons unfolded, the tension inside the arena kept building. For many in the crowd, the outcome felt more uncertain with every passing round. Were we about to witness the birth of a new Mr. Olympia? Or would Dorian Yates overcome his physical limitations and extend his reign at the top? The answer would go on to become one of the most debated moments in bodybuilding history. When it came time for the official results announcement, the anticipation inside the venue was at its peak. Many fans believed they were about to witness the crowning of a new champion. Nasser had brought arguably the best version of his physique, while Yates, still impressive, was clearly competing under the weight of accumulated injuries. The atmosphere was pure suspense. Then came the announcement that would define that night forever. Despite his physical limitations, Dorian Yates was declared the winner once again, securing his 6th consecutive Mr. Olympia title. The decision was met with surprise by many in the audience, and it quickly sparked intense debate among fans, journalists, and experts across the sport. Nasser finished in 2nd place, a result that, on its own, is still one of the most prestigious achievements in bodybuilding. But in that specific context, it left a bitter taste for many observers. A large number of fans believed Nasser had presented the most complete physique of the night, with a better balance of size, conditioning, and aesthetics. The controversy spread rapidly throughout the bodybuilding community. In magazines, interviews, and expert discussions, one question kept coming up: who really deserved to win the 1997 Olympia? For some, Yates' experience and legacy of dominance justified the decision. For others, that night should have marked the crowning of Nasser El Sonbaty. Regardless of where people stood, one thing became undeniable: the 1997 Olympia had turned into one of the most controversial results in the history of the sport. But for Nasser, that loss wasn't just another tough result to accept, it meant something much deeper. After years of intense training, personal sacrifice, and what many considered the best conditioning of his career, missing out on 1st place again hit him hard. The feeling that this might have been his one true opportunity began to weigh heavily on his mind. In the months following the competition, Nasser started reflecting more and more on what had happened that night. He began to question not only the specific outcome, but also the judging system itself. To him, the evaluation process seemed too dependent on subjective criteria, something that had always been part of bodybuilding, but now started to genuinely bother him. That frustration slowly changed the way he viewed the sport. What was once just competition began to feel more complex. He started raising concerns about transparency and how certain decisions were made. These weren't just passing thoughts, they gradually became a central part of how he spoke about bodybuilding. Even so, Nasser continued to train and compete with dedication. On stage, he still displayed the same professionalism that had always defined his career. But outside of competition, something had shifted. His emotional connection to bodybuilding wasn't the same anymore. The trust he once had in the system was slowly starting to fade. That moment marked the beginning of a shift that would become more and more visible in the years that followed. The athlete, once known primarily for his incredible physique, was now developing a strong, critical voice within the sport. And over time, those opinions would only grow louder, setting the stage for an even more controversial chapter in his story. Even after the controversial loss at the 1997 Mr. Olympia, Nasser continued competing among the best bodybuilders in the world. In 1998, he returned to the Olympia stage determined to prove he was still one of the most dangerous competitors in the lineup. Once again, he brought a highly competitive package and finished in third place. While that was still a strong result, many fans felt the same frustration. Nasser always seemed just one step away from the top, but never quite able to claim the title. At the same time, the bodybuilding landscape was starting to evolve. New names were rising, and a new generation of athletes was beginning to fight for space at the top of the sport. Still, Nasser remained a highly respected competitor. His massive size and balanced aesthetics ensured that he was always a serious threat in any show he entered. The last major highlight of his career came in 1999, when he won the Arnold Classic. That victory was a huge milestone, as the Arnold Classic is considered one of the most prestigious competitions in bodybuilding, second only to the Mr. Olympia. For Nasser, that win served as validation for all the years of hard work and dedication he had invested into the sport. After that achievement, however, his career began to enter a more challenging phase. The rise of new athletes, changes within the sport, and the natural wear and tear from years of competing at the highest level all started to impact his results. While he continued to compete, the same level of consistency that defined his dominance throughout the 1990s was no longer as evident. Over time, it became clear that Nasser's competitive chapter was coming to an end. After years of going head-to-head with the biggest names in bodybuilding and building a career filled with standout performances, he stepped away from competition and officially retired in 2005. But his story in the sport was far from over, because his voice was about to return in a very different, and far more controversial, way. A few years after retiring, Nasser once again drew attention within the bodybuilding world, but this time, not because of his physique or stage results. In 2008, he took part in a series of interviews that quickly became widely discussed across the community. Published by Bodybuilding.com, these conversations gave Nasser the opportunity to speak openly about his career, his experiences, and most importantly, his frustrations with professional bodybuilding. In those interviews, he held nothing back. Nasser criticized multiple aspects of the bodybuilding industry and even spoke directly about other athletes, judges, and influential figures within the sport. His statements were strong and at times, extremely direct. For longtime fans, this was striking, because it was rare to see a former competitor speak so openly about what happens behind the scenes. One of the most recurring topics in his comments was, once again, the 1997 Mr. Olympia. Nasser reaffirmed his belief that the competition had been influenced by industry interests. According to him, the decision to keep Dorian Yates as champion did not necessarily reflect what was presented on stage that night. In his view, external factors played a role in the final outcome. These statements quickly divided opinions among fans and experts. Some agreed with his perspective, believing he was simply saying what many had thought for years but never dared to express. Others, however, felt he was being overly harsh, and that his words carried the weight of frustration built up over years of coming close but falling short. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was undeniable: those interviews reignited old debates within the bodybuilding community. They brought discussions about judging, transparency, and controversial decisions back into the spotlight, once again forcing the sport to confront questions it had never fully answered. After the interviews he gave years after stepping away from competition, Nasser's image within bodybuilding changed dramatically. His strong statements and open criticism of the industry quickly spread among fans, athletes, and journalists. What was once just a debate about results and judging started to evolve into something much bigger, a conversation about how professional bodybuilding itself truly operates. For some fans, Nasser showed rare courage. Many believed he was simply saying out loud what countless athletes had thought for years but were unwilling to express publicly. From that perspective, his criticism raised important questions about transparency, judging criteria, and influence within major competitions. To these supporters, Nasser had become an independent voice in a system few dared to challenge. On the other hand, not everyone saw it that way. Some athletes and analysts began to view his comments as fueled by years of accumulated frustration. To them, the tone of his interviews felt overly aggressive, with personal attacks and harsh remarks directed at other competitors and key figures in the industry. In their eyes, Nasser had crossed the line between constructive criticism and resentment. This divide ultimately turned Nasser into one of the most polarizing figures in bodybuilding history. While part of the audience saw him as someone willing to challenge the system and speak his mind, others viewed him as a former athlete who had never fully come to terms with the disappointments of his career. The debate surrounding his stance continued to fuel discussions across the bodybuilding community. Over time, this duality became a defining part of his legacy. Nasser wasn't remembered only for his incredible physique or his performances on stage, but also for his strong personality and outspoken opinions. He had evolved from being just an elite competitor into a figure who sparked reflection, debate, and deeper conversations about the future of bodybuilding itself. And while those discussions were still alive among fans and athletes, Nasser's story would take an unexpected turn. On March 20, 2013, the bodybuilding world was hit with shocking news. Nasser El Sonbaty passed away at the age of 47 after contracting malaria during a trip to Egypt. His death marked the end of the life of an athlete who, for decades, had been one of the most impactful and debated figures in the sport, leaving many to reflect on everything he represented within bodybuilding. Despite the controversies that marked his later years and the criticisms he voiced about the industry, one thing was never questioned: the impact of his physique on the stages of the 1990s. Nasser possessed a rare combination of size, aesthetics, and stage presence that very few athletes have ever been able to replicate. In an era dominated by mass monsters, he still managed to maintain a balanced and visually striking look that impressed both fans and experts alike. Many of his peers also acknowledged that, at the peak of his career, Nasser was an extremely respected competitor. Behind the scenes, he was known for his strong personality and, at times, his sharp sense of humor. Even those who disagreed with his later opinions often admitted that he was one of the standout figures of his generation. Over the years, discussions about his career have never really faded. Some fans still believe he could have won the Mr. Olympia at some point in his journey. Others see his story as a clear example of how bodybuilding can be an incredibly competitive and often unpredictable sport. Regardless of perspective, his name remains deeply connected to one of the most intense eras in bodybuilding history. Today, when looking back at the 1990s bodybuilding scene, it's impossible to ignore Nasser's presence. His incredible physique, strong personality, and controversial opinions made him a truly unique figure in the sport. And maybe that exact combination is what continues to keep his story alive to this day. Looking at Nasser's entire journey, it becomes clear that his story in bodybuilding is one of the most impactful and complex in the modern era. He was an extraordinary athlete, with an incredible physique and a stage presence that very few competitors could match. Even without winning the Mr. Olympia title, Nasser established himself as one of the defining figures of the 1990s, consistently competing among the very best in the world. His physique combined size, symmetry, and aesthetics in a way that stood out in any lineup. For years, he remained one of the top contenders for the sport's most prestigious title. For many fans, the 1997 Mr. Olympia still stands as one of the most debated moments in bodybuilding history, a rivalry and decision that continues to spark discussion about who truly deserved the win. But Nasser's story isn't defined by stage results alone. His strong personality and outspoken opinions placed him right at the center of major debates about how the bodybuilding industry operates. By openly criticizing judges, athletes, and officials, he became a figure who divided opinions across the sport. For some, Nasser was an unfairly overlooked athlete who had the courage to challenge the system. For others, his words reflected years of built-up frustration. Either way, his voice helped bring attention to important discussions about transparency in judging in professional bodybuilding. In the end, Nasser El Sonbaty's legacy goes far beyond trophies or placings. He left a lasting mark on the sport, not only through his physique, but through his presence, his mindset, and the conversations he sparked. And now the question goes to you: after hearing this entire story, do you think Nasser deserved to win the 1997 Mr. Olympia? And do you believe his criticisms of the bodybuilding industry were justified? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is a debate that, to this day, is still very much alive in the bodybuilding world.